I'd like to point out there's a Chazon Ish interpreting the Rambam does a very strange thing. There's a Chazon Ish in Or Chaim, Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, Siman Kuf Mem Ois Gimel. Ubi'ika Cheshbon Shelonu Shekosav Horam Shuhu Halocha L'Mishmi Sinai. Okay. Ein hakavona shenimsu proitesov bahalocha, that the protim of the cheshbon were not given bahalocha. Elenimsa sherishus lachachamim lasis cheshbon kavur. They have the right. They have the right to make a cheshbon. Shal piv yisudru hashonim v'atimu shnois achamo u'shnois halavona v'al pi zeh kove hillel u'beis dinoi es cheshbonenu. Avol lo nimno lekfoye cheshbon acher shegam al piv yisudru shnois achamo v'halavona. Ukriyom Shmuel Rosh Hashanah Chof Amud Beis Yechil L'Skune L'Kule Goyla V'im Cheshbon Hillel Mekubal Misinai Manu Tzrichen L'Shmuel B'zeh. Do you need Shmuel there? I mean, forgetting about everything, because Sanhedrin was still an extant. And the cheshbon he's talking about, l'chera, has to do with the Mishnayos and the Eichin of a limited number of how many murba, and the Ram in Perik Yud Ches of Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, that you can have kviyas shelo al pi bezdin when they're cloudy times or whatever it is. I'm just not. And just besides that, okay, the Ram says that until the Mei Abayin Lova, there was Sanhedrin was Kaim, so there was no option of the Cheshbon, which was Halocha L'Mishmi Sinai. I'm not sure what he's asking, okay? But let's even aniach everything he says is correct, okay? I have a basic problem over here, which I don't catch it, okay? I think I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion of this mitzvah, and I think I mentioned it again last week, okay? There's a basic problem which I have no idea how other Rishonim are going to answer. And the only way that I see to do it is with the Rambam. Somehow, even though in Kiddush al Pi Aliyah, there's 1 day Rosh Chodesh, in Cheshbon, they became 2 days Rosh Chodesh. And I pointed it out last week that works with the Rambam, that since the Cheshbon is based on Moed Emsoi, so even though the halacha is you count days and months, but since the month in Chefsa is 29 and a half, and Tafshin Tzaddik Gimel Chalokim, so Rosh Chodesh always falls out on, if it's a Chodesh Mole, on the first day Rosh Chodesh also. So therefore you have 2 days Rosh Chodesh. But if you say, that's only if you say the Cheshbon is Halocha L'Mishmi Sinai. But if the cheshbon is just a takana, as the Ramban learns, or whichever Hillel put together, and to say that the halacha Mashiach gave them the right to make any cheshbon they wanted, and if the cheshbon happens to be b'diuk with the Moed Emsoi, therefore you have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, that to me is a little bit wild. So I'm not sure what the Chazon Ish does with all this. In Rambam. Okay, secondly, okay, that was my first point. Okay, and that's based, all this is based on Ram Per Ches Halacha Daled, Yom Shloshim Le'olam Oisen Oisen Rosh Chodesh B'Cheshbon Zeh. Why is the Cheshbon Zeh? Because the Cheshbon based on Moed Emsoi. And that which I said once, okay, just to add something here, which I didn't mean to say, but I think you might gain something from it. The Rabbi Bechaya asked the kasha about Mochas HaChodesh, that there were 2 days Rosh Chodesh, is right, that it was always Cheshbon, like Rabbi Chananel, like we know of Sadia. So I remember there was some that wanted to say that the 2 days Rosh Chodesh is the Cheshbon of the Rambam Perek Yud Ches, which they were able to use Bizman Ariyah, because it was cloudy a few months. I think that answer is ridiculous. For very simply, because the only time that 2 days Rosh Chodesh is only if the Cheshbon is based on Moed Emsoi. The Cheshbon that the Sanhedrin used in order that the month should just be in line was not based necessarily on Moed Emsoi. And there's no clue that it was in the Rambam's Mashma, it was a separate Kabbalah. So therefore, I don't believe that would be an answer. And therefore, there are other ways, and there's Radaks or whatever it is, interpret what the Mochas HaChodesh Hasheni is. Okay, that's not for us. Now, what I really want to do is the last point in Kufna Gimel, just to compare and contrast the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah Mishnah Torah. What is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh? So here he says the mitzvah is Cheshbon Chadoshim V'Shonim. Okay? So the mitzvah is to make the Cheshbon, whatever the Cheshbon of Keshariyah with spherical trigonometry, in order to find out if the moon is visible. And I guess the Cheshbon, it could be when our Cheshbon, which is also based on Cheshbon, but it's a different Cheshbon, and both are part of, there's the Ibor is Keshariyah, the amount of spherical arc that between the sun and the moon, that the moon should be visible, and there's a Moed Emsoi, both the Cheshbon. In Mishnah Torah, he presents a whole new approach. In Perek Aleph, Halacha Zayin, the Ram says, Mitzvas Aseh min HaTorah al Bezdin, Mitzvah Aseh min HaTorah al Bezdin, Shiachshavu, V'yeda'u, Im Yirah Yorech or Lo Yirah. So Bezdin has to first make the calculations, okay? And those calculations will be in Eretz Yisrael, as the Rams will say later in Halacha Tes. Ushiyidreshu es ho'edim achi kachu es hachodesh. So the Ram added something, that the whole Seder Kabbalah's Bezdin is part of the mitzvah. And even though you have an issue of Drish Chakiris, which may be only in the Foshas or whatever it is, but whatever it is, this is part of Kiddush HaChodesh. That Drishas Edim ad Shikatru Es HaChodesh. And not only the Kiddush and the Kabbalah's Edim, V'yishalchu v'yodiu eshar ha'om b'eze yoim hu Rosh Chodesh. And this is also part of the mitzvah. The shluchim are part of the mitzvah. This is all new. This was not in Sefer Mitzvos or the Minyan HaKotzer. Kidei sheyedu b'eze yoim heina mo'ados. Very interesting. It's not for the Rosh Chodesh itself, but for the Moados. And he says the mitzvah here, he said, the mitzvah was HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodoshim. But here the mitzvah is, he says, Shenema Ashetiku Oiso Mikoi Kodesh, which is basically to call the Moados, and he learns to let the Am know that they are Moados, and when they are, he's changed the pasuk and he's changed the mitzvah. The Rambam doesn't he's very careful never to change the minyan. The minyan key who's locked in cement. But what the mitzvah is and what the pasuk is and anything, that's up for grabs in Mishnah Torah. V'ne'amar v'shamarto es hachuka hazeis l'moado, which is the second pasuk which we had at the end over here, which then in Mishnah Torah, that was the problem which I spoke about last week. He's locked himself into a position that the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, Shabbat is Chuk HaZeis, even though he says by Tefillin in Mishnah Torah, that basically there's an ashara for Maniach Tefillin Achashkiyas Achama. And Shabbat is Chuk HaZeis, Miyom Yomimo. I assume that the fact that he says the Shomata is a Chuk HaZeis, L'moado Yom Yomimo, it means then, and the Yod Yomimo I assume is a year cycle, that Iba Hashana certainly should be included in the mitzvah also, because you want the Moadim to be in their proper time, Yom Yomimo. And we pointed out last week, the Yom Yomimo is a year cycle. Upside you're going to discuss the Barichos. And that's the Mechilta that the Ram himself quotes. Besides everything, the Ram quotes the Mechilta that says that this pasuk, Shemat Zechuk HaZeis Yom Yomimo, refer to Kiddush HaChodesh and Iba Hashana, as the Ram is quoted over here in the mitzvah. So then it comes out, HaChodesh Zelochem Rosh Chadoshim is Protei mitzvah. But the mitzvah is Asher Tikku Eis Moadam, V'shomat Zechuk HaZeis, L'moado Yom Yomimo. Just you should know something, and I say this in trepidation. I mentioned a truth from Yeshua Nogid, the great-grandson of the Rambam, that the point of the Karoim, why they said that there's Kiddush HaChodesh and Iba Hashana Mechutz La'aretz, because we learned the mitzvah from HaChodesh Zelochem Rosh Chadoshim, which was said in Mitzrayim. So one could imagine, I'm not sure if that the Rambam wanted to move away, from that approach. I'm not just saying, someone could say such a thing. Whether it's true or not, I have no proof for it. Now, next. All the Rambam learns in Mishnah Torah, from HaChodesh Rosh Chadoshim, he learns in Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. Chodshei Hashana heim Chodshei Halavona. Shenema Oilas Chodesh B'Chodshei. V'nema HaChodesh Zelochem Rosh Chadoshim. Kach Omu Chachomim. Hera lo HaKodesh Baruch Hu LeMoshe B'Mare HaNevuah Demus Lavona V'Omer Gezerei V'Kadesh. So there's a Meseira also. It's a question telling you that Chodshei Hashana are lunar months that we learn at Chodesh Zelochem Rosh Chadoshim and the Meseira Gezerei V'Kadesh. The Rambam, I'm not sure, because some ask the Rambam in Protei HaMitzvos, Mitzvas Aseh, he l'chashev v'leida v'kvoya be'eze yoim, he tchilas kol chodesh v'chodesh mechotshei hashana. So there are those that claim that the Rambam doesn't have Iba Hashana in the mitzvah. I only challenge them, and I ask them a very simple question. If that would be the case, why did the Rambam say leida, l'chashev v'leida v'kvoya be'eze yoim, who tchilas kol chodesh v'chodesh? Why say b'Chodshei Hashanah? What's Chodshei Hashanah? Where does the year come in? I think that the Rambam Bekitza and the Pratim wanted Mirames to Ibar Shana also, and that you have to have a year, and it's months of a year, and the first of the month, and to be clear the year. Okay, now you also see something else, and this also might help the Rambam. That once you say Asher Tiku Oisam B'Moadam, that is the mitzvah. Then it says the Bezdin's the Bailim. It's not that Tom, Dick, and Harry. Okay? And he assumed that it was Sanhedrin also. And you have the Aloha Vatem Afilu Mutim. And the truth is, the Rashbam learned something like this in Pshutos HaMikra. The Rashbam in Vayikra, Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Beis, the Masher Tikoisam Mikra Kodesh, Asher Tizamnu Oisam Zmane Kodesh, Kol Loshen Kriya, She'etzel Moadim Loshen Kfis Zmanhu, Kmo Kora Alai Moyed, V'chein HaTargum, Me'ora Kadisha. It's a kriya of Kodesh. V'loshen Kimikra Ksil. So this is a call. The Bezin is calling and calling Rosh Chodesh. The only question that one could ask in Mishnah Torah is where is the tzivui? Because a priori, looking at the pasuk, I understand v'shamaltes a chuk hazos, that's a tzivui. So I would have put that first. And he says, Asher tiku oisam mikra kodesh, it's a sipur dvarim. L'chayre, it's against shorish ches. There's no tzivui over here. And besides everything else, there's a prepositional phrase, Asher tiku oisam. To make a prepositional phrase into a tzivui in a mitzvah, you know, you need you need a lot of help to do it. The question is the Ram Chayze from Shorish Shmini that mitzvahs don't need a tzivui b'dafka? It's very difficult to swallow. Just, it's enough that the Torah is matayeh, that this is a certain situation that he wants, and that makes a mitzvah, something like what the Ram called Shrana in Mishnah Torah. I mean, Sefer HaMitzvos, which is basically religious law, religious legislation. If this is true, so I just don't want to, if this is true, it might help you in another mitzvah, in Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph of Hilchos Ovel, the Ram says that the mitzvah is learned from V'chalti Chatas Hayom V'yitev B'nei Hashem. There's no tzivur there either. It's just also a sipur dvarim. But it certainly is a revelation of what's in Torah. Hayitev B'nei Hashem. However, independent of everything, I can prove to you that the Rambam learned the Mishnah Torah, there's a tzivui, and Asher tiku oisam b'moado. And that is, the tzivui is a little strange. The tzivui there is not on Bezdin, but it's on the community, the Jews in general, to be semich on Bezdin. The Rambam Perek Beis Halacha Yud. Bezdin shikitchu es hachodesh ben shoyim meimutim ben anusim Harizeh Mekudesh. V'chayovin hakol l'sakein hamoados al yom shekidchu boy. Af al pi shezeh yedea yoda, af pi shezeh yoda shetov. Chayiv lismach aleim. She'ein adova moso Elohem. Umi shetzivo lishmoa moados. Hu tzivo lismoich alehem. Shenema ashetiku oisam b'moado. Ashetiku oisam. The truth is, the Ram clearly says it. The question is, where does he get this from? The sivoy. This needs an explanation. But, what I was trying to say, maybe Mr. Terry, require tzivui here and there. But here, I don't know what constitutes a tzivui. The Rambam in Shiur Shmini has a long discussion that the Pshuto Shel Mikra he talks about language and linguistics and what a tzivui means. And he quotes an Arabic scholar to tell you about what, and here, anyone who understands anything about linguistics will see there's no tzivui over here. This is very odd. Unless he learns in the Meseira, is it tzivui, is it Pirush Makubal? Where is it? Okay, this is the Chasal Siddur Pesach in Kuf Nun Gimel. There's a lot more to say, but we have to move on. Now, Mitzvah Kuf Nun Daled. Kuf Nun Daled. Hi shetzivonu Lishbois HaMitzvah Ho'arba V'chamishim Umeya. 154. He shetzivonu Lishbois B'Shabbos V'Omroi Yis'aleh U'Vayoyim HaShvi'i Tishbois. A Mitzvas Aseh of Shvisa on Shabbos. V'hinei nichpal tzivui b'mitzvah zo pomim. Many times. What are these many times? In here he says Parmim or Parmayim with 2 years. I don't know what that means. That's Ibn Tibbon. However, in Kapach he says Kama Parmim, and that Lachor is correct because the Rambam in Shiur Chi writes the following: Kvar noida she'atzivui b'Shabbos lo nuach nichpal batera. So that certainly is kama pomim, but not pamayim. Now, ubielonu yis'ala means God is explaining to us that yis'ala. Shashvisa mi malachos hi chayva. Okay. So then, Ubayoyim Hashvi'i Tishbois is a mitzvah to rest or to cease and desist from malachos. Okay. So the lav ashara is a lav of malacha called malacha lisas, and the aseh is an aseh of malacha, and then the mirror image, one or the other. Except for one is an ashara and one is a mitzvah. And on this then is Shorish Shishi, that there are two mitzvahs in Minyan. There's an ashara and a mitzvah aseh. And that's what he says in Shorish Shishi, Da Shadovo Ho'echod Yiyeh Boy Aseh v'lo say one thing, like the mirror image, one or the other. Al echod mishloish aponim. Im sheyiyeh ma'asem and amaisim Mitzvas Aseh, ve'oiver lo yavo mitzvahs lo Aseh, k'moy Shabbos, and that's the it. There's an Aseh and a lo Aseh, and here's the Aseh. And this is the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos. Shvisa b'shvi'i mimlocha mitzvahs Aseh, shenema b'yoyim hashvi'i tishbois, v'chol ha'isa b'mlocha bitel mitzvahs Aseh. V'ova loisas shnemo loy sase kol. So in this bitel, you see, sometimes the Ram says ovar al mitzvahs aseh. So I'm not even sure if there's an isa aseh over here. He says that if someone does malacha on Shabbos, besides violating the lois aseh, he violates a mitzvah aseh. It means that he's not mekayim it. Bitul means he wasn't mekayim the aseh. V'ova lois aseh. Shene'emar lois aseh kol malacha. So this clearly, both way expressing himself in the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos and over here, the aseh is an aseh of malacha. Okay? Interesting. In other places in Mishnah Torah, you get the impression that this aseh of Tishbais goes beyond the purview of malacha. And I'll read to you two Rambams. The Rambam per Chof Aleph of Hilchos Shabbos Halacha Aleph. Nema batera Tishbois afilu midvorim she'enon melacha chayiv lishbois mehen. And then he explains the various takanas they made of Shvus. Shvus is the Rabbanon. He doesn't have a privy in any way to what he had in mind over here. But when the Ram quotes a pasuk, the Ram is not a darshan in Mishnah Torah. The Ram quotes a pasuk, he's telling us, Kilu, this is a bona fide d'raisa drasha. So nema b'teira tishba is the dvorim she'enim malacha. Then you find the same thing. There's not only in Mishnah Torah over here, it's also in Pirush Mishnayos. In Beitza, in Perik Hey, Mishnah Beis, the Ram says, Omru mishum shvus, or mishum mishus, or mishum mitzvah, v'atzaloyma. Says, Zeh she'oma Hashem, tishbois yesh bichloloi, hashvisa, mikol hadvorim shehu moine, Uma shekorom shvus. Yesh bichlolo ashvisa mikol advorim shehu moine. In this Mishnah, the heim shekom shvus. So somehow the shvus it's a very odd thing. Let's just look over here. He's saying that this includes the shvus. Let's go to Chof Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Nem v'atei tishbos v'dvorim she'enim malacha chayiv lishbos behen v'dvorim harbe hein she'osur chacham mishum shvus. So what's the segue? Mehen dvorim asurim mipnei shedoimim melachos, mehen dvorim asurim gzeira shema yovo mehen isa skila. So it's a very strange thing. The ki'ilu, there's a d'raisa that you don't require malacha on the tishbais, and that gave the chachamim the rishus to make it a shvus. Well, the ma'aser said it's d'rabbanan. So what's a d'raisa? very difficult. Then there's another Rambam at the end of Perek Chav Daled. He says, "Asa Chachamim Perek Chav Daled Halacha Yud Beis Asa Chachamim Letaltel Mixas Dvorim B'Shabbos Keder Shoyse B'Chol." And then he says at the end, and he says, "Do Kavachayma Sheikyo Chol Be'enov V'Yovo L'Agbil L'Sakin Kelim Mipina L'Pina O Mibayis L'Bayis." It was the day for the house decorations and whatever. O Latzni Avonim Ukiyetze Bohen Shari Hu Botel V'Yoshev B'Beisai. He has nothing to do. V'Yevakesh Dover Shis Asek Boy. And he's looking for something to keep him busy. V'nimsa Shelo Shavas Ubotel Hatam Shenema Bater L'man Yenuach. L'man Yenuach is a tam, but whether it's a mitzvah or not, I'm not getting involved. And it might be part of the mitzvah, we'll see. But Shebotel Hatam Shenema Bater L'man Yenuach. Basically, what the Torah has legislated is that Shabbos should be day of menucha. So it means that L'man Yenuach is included also not to, it's the Rambam is talking about the Tzuras Hayoim, she lo Shabbos boy Shvisa Hanikeres. And that's also included under Tishbais. That's also not Malacha. This is, the Rabbi also, when we're learning Shabbos, point this Rambam out and contrasted it to the Ramban. It's in 1971. The Ramban v'zeh derech haTorah lifroit in Vayiko Yutes Beis, and he says v'chein be'inyan Shabbos osar hamalachos belav v'atrochim b'aseh kloli shenema tishbos. V'od eforish there, and he said it in Chav Gimel Chav Daled. Avo pirish Shabbosin kachu shetiel or menucha min haTorah va'omer kamo shebe'alma. They're very similar, but I just would like to have my own comment over here. What the Ramban over here is presenting the Trochim the Omer, and then he says further, V'nei huzuru ala meloches b'Shabbos b'lav v'yoinish keris u'misa. That's v'atrochim v'omer b'aseh hazeh. So, right? That's what he's say Azeh. And he doesn't have, he only has a lav by Melochis. Okay, look what he says. He says, V'nei huzu ala Melochis b'Shabbos b'lav v'oinish kores u'misa v'atrochim v'omer v'yaseh Azeh. So it's a completely different interpretation of the Aseh than the Rambam has. So Rabbi say this is not a problem at all, okay? And there's a very, very important yesod over here going on. The Ramban in Chumash has taken upon himself to have basically two pirushim. he's taken himself to understand Torah in Derech HaPshat, and taken upon himself to understand Torah in Derech HaBuseinu. What the Ramban says over here, when he says, because the Gemara says, there's an Aseh and Lo Aseh when a person violates Malacha on Shabbos. For foolish Gemaras in many places in Shabbos, okay? So you can't say what you say, but you can say, in Derech HaBuseinu, there's an Aseh and Malacha. But in Derech HaPshat, the lav is the lav of Malacha, and the Aseh is Tocham v'Omer. Okay. Now, plenty of the Rambam does it in a different way. Okay. Now, I just want to tell you something. I'm going to tell it to you in a very terse form, but there's a lot that I encapsulate in this terseness, and if you work on it, you probably get a lot more. The question is this Machayev anything? What does all this mean? Labuseni said one thing, and the Derech HaPshat is something else. The Rambam in general, which I point out in many places, the Rambam says Minyan HaMitzvos is Derech HaBuseinu, not Derech HaPshat. So what is this? What's he telling us for? So I think what happens over here is the Ramban's opinion is that Derech HaPshat is an expression with Tzon HaTorah. Especially with Tzon HaTorah. And in that frame of reference, as an expression of Tzon HaTorah, okay, so you could even give Musa if you don't do it, okay? But it's not mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are according to Derech HaBuseinu. And I want to explain to you how I arrived at this, okay? The Rambam, first of all, the reason why I'm saying this, okay, is based on a line in the Ramban in Shirish Beis. The Ramban says that the Pshuto Shel Mikra is the Derech Chitzoni, and the Droshes Chazal are the Pnimi and Shnei Emes. Okay, so there's no steer. That's one. Two, the Ramban, in Shirish Sheni, says in discussing what the purpose or the charge of the Nevi'im were. They're basically two things. They're basically not they're not coming here to Machadish Mitzvahs. Okay. They could be a historical record of a Gzeira, okay, or they can encapsulate the Meseira, that there's a Meseira as the Novi, as Echel Matiki Ashmur is telling you there's a Kabbalah. Moshe Rabbeinu lo yiches b'nuzim v'nayin, el kach kibul ish v'ish, Moshe Rabbeinu. So what the Ramban does, is quote psukim in what we call Nehemiah. I think it's a Perek Yud, what we call, what the Galach called the Nehemiah, just to use, but the Rishonim used it just in order to know chapter and verse. It quotes that when he talks about Muksa in Perek Yud, okay? The Ramban also quotes, each one, if you look carefully at the Ramban, he quotes a different psukim in the same Perek. Because some of the psukim are talking about Muksa, and some of the psukim are talking about Trochim. And the Ramban quotes the psukim Nehemiah as the basis for Yom Terech v'Omer. But different psukim. So it means that the psukim, that the posuk, the Derech HaPshat is a mechayev, number one. So much so, they can give Musa for it. But the Einshin, the formal Einshin that we're talking about in Torah are only based on the Matiki Ashmur on Rabbi Hussein. It's an amazing thing. The Rambam doesn't go so far as the Ramban. He just says, Botel Tam Shene B'nei B'Torah L'man Yanuach. And he has the drasha. See, the question is, what did he do? Because Minyan HaMitzvos, also the Rambam, is based on the fact that the Matiki Ashmur said Aseh v'lo Aseh. So that's why it clearly says that it's Malacha. However, there is a Deraisa drasha, and the Rambam quotes a pasuk to it's not the, and it's just the opposite. Yeah. See, I'm not sure. Maybe the Rambam will learn the Pshuto Shel Mikra. I'm not sure what happens exactly. The Pshuto Shel Mikra is Malacha, I would assume, because he's learning that the tooth, that's the mitzvah. And see, if you notice over here, see, I'll tell you why I would say it's Pshuto Shel Mikra, and he's disagreeing with Ramban. Because the Rambam over here does not bring a proof that this is malach. There's a mitzvah over here. He doesn't quote the Gemara and Shabbos of Aseh and Lo Aseh. So it means it's not necessary. Why is it not necessary? Because it's Pshuto Shel Mikra. It's talking about Malacha. The way he presents it in Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph in Mishnah Torah. So it comes out that because of the Tam Torah that should be L'man Yanuach, we expand what's going on over here. And that should be Shvis HaNikeres. I don't believe that it's what the Ramban's doing, okay? And then we have to understand what he meant in Perek Chaf Aleph Halacha Aleph. What is the Deraisa and what is the Derabonon in Shvus? Okay? But whatever it is, I would say the Rambams are arguing and that the Pshuto Shel Mikra is Malacha. In contrast to the Ramban. Okay? Now, next. Then the Rambam has another statement over here. He says, this is the reading. Okay? If you read this don't make no sense. Because you can have an obligation on us, you can have an obligation on an Eved, but you cannot have an obligation on a behemoth, okay? And I'm not getting involved medieval times. They brought behemoths to court and whatever, okay, yeah, okay. I don't know if you can bring a riot from that, but I'm just being nice, okay? Now, next. The pasuk says like this: "Ubayom hashvi tishbois l'man yanuach shocho v'chamocho v'nofesh beramoshcho v'ager." Okay, but right, that's what the pasuk says. So in Mishnah Torah, but I'm not sure if he really is the bottle atam shenema. But l'cheira, this L'man Yanuach is coming to modify and expand the mitzvah. That it's not only malacha, but it includes not only malacha on me, but includes the behemoth and the eved. Okay, L'man Yanuach, shocho. Okay. Still, what we're talking about here is malacha. This has not moved to the next level of Trochim. This is Malacha. And this is not Shvis Nikeres. He's doing two things. On one hand, he quotes Hatam, Shvis Nikeres, and makes Kilul not part of the mitzvah. And Laman is really part of the mitzvah. It's a very strange thing. How do you do both? I'm a little bit confused about that, okay? But he does both, okay? So, l'cheira, what happens is that Laman Yenuach could expand the Etzem Mitzvah. And that's l'cheira what he's doing in Perek Chof, Halacha Aleph and Gimel, in Hilchos Shabbos. Also, l'hoitzi masa ala behema b'Shabbos shnema Laman Yenuach shocho v'chamoecho. So Laman Yenuach is an Isa, it's an Ashara. Also, the Israel lahashil es it's azhola from what I say. Lahaski behemo gasa lagoy shel yasa ben bolacha b'Shabbos v'alihu mitzuva al shvisas behemtoy. So this is the aseh of shvisas behemtoy, and it's only from the man. See here. I'm not sure how to can this exactly, because l'cheira, what you should say is that it's an Mitzvas Aseh. But the Rambam Perek Aleph only said that the worst you do for yourself, do malach, is only Bittul Aseh. So I'm a little bit confused, okay? But he says it clearly is an Isa. Now, and you understand, he clearly says that the Isa is on the Bailim. Okay? And therefore, we can't be maski our behemoths to goyim, because when they're going to force the behemoth to do malacha, we're the Bailim, and we're obligated to do something about it. Make sure it doesn't happen. Very interesting. So then it means it's oleinu to watch for ourselves and to watch our behemoths. Not our behemteinu, it's not on the behemoths, but it's to watch the behemoths. It shouldn't do malach. Okay. I'm not sure watch, we'll see later about that more clear. In Perek Chof Halacha Yudal, the Ram says, Kishein she'ha'odam mitzuva al shvisas behemtoi b'Shabbos, kachu mitzuva al shvisas avdoi v'amosai. This kishein is a little bit odd, and we'll see, okay? So it's an equation, per se. Then he says like this, V'af al pi she'hein b'nei de'as u'ledas atzman oisin, and they mitzvah olav l'shomron u'leman on me'asiyas malacha. They themselves are mutzvah for malacha, but the bailim has to be a guard to watch and make sure they do not do malacha. Again, the Rambam uses Laman, the Tam, as a mitzvah. So it means, even though the Eved is mechuyev himself, okay, but the other is also mechuyev to watch, he doesn't do malach. Now, the shame is difficult. I'll explain to you why. Because the behema, there's no din that I have to go spend Shabbos and watch my behemoth that it doesn't do malacha on its own volition. Okay? By an Eved, I have to make sure that the Eved doesn't do malacha. Right? It's different. What the Ram is talking about in Perek Chof Halacha Aleph, when he talks about putting a masa on the behemoth, is to cause the behemoth to do a malacha for me, or to cause it to do a malacha per se. So if I mashal it to a guy or schiras to a guy, and the guy is doing malacha with the behemoth, the guy is causing the behemoth to do malacha, so it means that man is causing the behemoth to do malacha, and I'm muzer on it. But if the behemoth is walking around and doing malacha, that's not my problem. So it's a shame. But the shmir is very different. In the case of behemoth, this is to set up this scenario. In the Eved, I have to make sure he doesn't do malacha. Now, there's another element over here, which the Ram doesn't talk about, okay? The Ram talks about Avdoi and Behemtoi, correct? Oleinu, v'abehemteinu, v'avdeinu. What about Ger? Ger Toishov? So the Rambam doesn't explain Vager in the Pasuk. But he does in Mishnah Torah, in Perek Chof Halacha Yudalid. He says, Hoil v'ger toishav oise melacha la'atzmoi b'Shabbos v'ger tzedek hawi huki Yisrael l'chol dovo b'mi nema v'nofesh ben amoscha v'ger. Who is this ger? So the Ram says, Ze ger toishav. You have a business relationship with him. Lakita is schira. You've hired him. He's a hired hand. K'moy ben Amosai. Shelo ya'aseh melochol Yisrael. Rabbi b'Shabbos. Avoli atzmo eisa. He's not allowed. But it's on us. We're not allowed that the behema, not that they get toishav, should do malacha for us. It's not the case of Eved. Eved have to make sure the Eved doesn't do malacha. Here, it's very similar to behema, except in behema, I'm setting up the malacha, or someone's setting up the malacha. Here, the person is doing malacha on his own volition to get toishav. But who is he doing it for? That's the important question. So it means in Ger Toishav, Ulekit and Schira, Amir Le'akum D'Raisa. So in both in both in Ger Toishav and Behema, you have to be money them from doing malacha. But the question is, which malacha? Malacha, which you're not being in Eved, you're money from doing malacha. And in Ger Toishav, you have to try to stop them from doing malacha for us. So you have to ask them, so what are you doing and what do you have in mind? I don't know exactly what Nemanis is and how you define that, okay? That's a different issue, okay? And in Behema, you're setting it up, okay? The Ravid disagrees with the Rambam and says the mitzvah shvisa is on the Eved, and the Odin is not mitzuva l'mona minasos malacha. And the mitzvah of Meniya, what's on the Bailim, is only on Eved HaToshavim. And Eved Animo, there's no mitzvah on him. He's his own man. That's the Ravid says in Perek Chof Halacha Yudalid, Om Avrom ein advorim alolo kitikunon, she'imolu v'tovlu l'shem avdus harihen k'neshei Yisrael. Gemuros, Ubnei Einshin hein la'atzmon. V'le'ishira Torah es rabon aleim. Ela al eved v'oma hatoishavim. Shelo yasu malachtoi. Shelo toima shvus ba'almohu ki'amiru l'goy. Ela lav nami ika. I don't know what the lav is. I would assume an Isa Aseh, I assume what it means. V'afilu yase me'atzmon. Avol tzorach atzmon oisen kol tzorachon. So if he's doing the work for you, so it's only on this Eved, almost all the same Vager, it's all talking about the same thing, it's all a Ger Tosha. Okay. Now, being Izbaru Mishpatei Mitzvazo, Meseches Shabbos, Meseches Yontif. Okay. Now we'll start it. VaMitzvah HaChomesh v'Chamish U'Meir. 155. He shetzivonu lekadesh es haShabbos v'leimod dvorim b'knisaso v'yitziaso. Okay. Here, before we get started, what the mitzvah of Kiddush is Havdalah included? What's a deraisa? What is the tzuras of Kiddush? But just a simple thing. This translation of Ibn Tibbon is very creative, to say the least. Look at the text here. In Kufnan Hay, we have Mukapach translates Hatzivui shenetz tavinu Loma dvorim b'yoyim HaShabbos be'ez knisaso be'ez yitziaso. So the idea of Kiddush is not mentioned here at all. Correct? Here in Ibn Tibbon, it says Vor lekadesh es haShabbos v'leimo dvorim b'knisaso v'yitziaso. He puts two things together, and what he's done is an amazing thing. You know what he's done? He's mixing and matching. He took from the Minyan HaKotzer and pasted it on and added to the Sefer HaMitzvos. The Minyan HaKotzer, it says the Kadosh HaShabbos. And in the original Arabic, it says Leimo Dvorim. So he says two things, Kilo. If someone medayik can start saying Torah, he should vol l'kadosh HaShabbos v'leimo dvorim. The knisasa v'tziasa. That's what we have here. Just from the play, the Arabic. He says b'knisasa v'tziasa, but there's no din that you require Shabbos dafka, and that's the Rambam per Chavtes Halacha Yud Aleph. Yesh ol mekadesh ala kois erev Shabbos moed yoyim af al pi shelo nichnas o haShabbos v'chein mavda ala kois moed yoyim af al pi shadayin hi Shabbos shemitzvah zechira lo omer bein b'shas knisasa v'yitziasa bein koidem l'shah zo b'ma'at. And that's very good. The Ram, we don't know that he has taste for Shabbos, and it doesn't have to be on Shabbos b'chlal. And not only do you have to say words, but what type of words? Goydel hayoyim hazeh u'ma'alosoy, or as Kapach says, v'loy memusay. Loy medvom b'yom haShabbos is knisas yitziyasay nasko. Dulasei v'malus. Something we have to talk about the greatness of Shabbos, which the Mitzvah Hashem will pick up next week, B'li Neder.